Hey, it's Pastor Quincy from Cuyahoga Falls Church of the Nazarene, here to talk to you about the final episode, episode 8 of season 5 of The Chosen. This is a video study guide for The Chosen, which is a free TV series about the life of Jesus. You can get it on the Chosen app for free now, or if you have Prime Video, you can also see it there. So, this episode begins with our flashback with Thaddeus, who turns out to be the first disciple that Jesus called. I love this scene for many reasons. One is because I've always thought Thaddeus is somewhat of a fascinating character in the Bible. We maybe have one line that Thaddeus says in John chapter 14, but that's it. We don't know anything else about him. So I love that the show gives him some background. Certainly, he gave his life for Jesus. We know that he witnessed for Jesus throughout the Roman Empire. And so we get the beginning of his story here. So here's some things to note. Thaddeus is a stonemason, Jesus is a carpenter. Jesus may also have been a mason, a little confusion about that word, but in any case, they're working together, and I love that the show has them working on a latrine, a public bathroom, which is just amazing to think about Jesus working on something so ordinary and even a little bit of shameful. But Jesus is doing his job, and he's singing Psalm 39, verses 1 through 5. Interesting that he's singing a psalm that talks about knowing the end of his life, and that will, of course, connect to what we see at the end of this episode, where Jesus is struggling with the idea of his life coming to an end and how it will end. Pay attention to the psalms the show uses because they always have some extra meaning. I love how Jesus is playfully sarcastic towards Thaddeus, who eventually has a joke about Jesus being from Nazareth. They talk about Egypt. Jesus displays a little bit of his knowledge of the future, saying, not everything in Egypt is going to last, some things will last. And then starts to talk to Thaddeus about a kingdom not built by hands. I think there's a little bit of a connection here to 2 Corinthians 5:1, where Paul talks about this house not built by hands, and to Daniel chapter 2, verses 44 through 45, where Daniel interprets the vision from King Nebuchadnezzar of a kingdom that is a rock that's not built by human hands. I love how this scene brings out the awkwardness of Jesus calling his first disciple, the first person who chose to come after this rabbi who wasn't a rabbi before but now is a rabbi and comes from Nazareth. How awkward was that? And you can see a little bit of the desperation in Jesus to get his first follower. And I love that very human aspect of what Jesus is doing here. And then, of course, we have the scene of Thaddeus, perhaps in the future or maybe in the past. Everything's a little all mixed together, having these visions of what Jesus talks about, his followers being interesting, unfettered, funny, brave, nurturing, smart, strong, passionate, fiery, loyal, loving, and imperfect people, the most that this earth has ever seen. What great words and adjectives to describe the people who follow Jesus. Thaddeus is going to have to lose his own life. That's something that Jesus talks about in Matthew 10, verse 39, and he's going to go to the ends of the earth with this message. A little reference here to Mark chapter 16, verse 15. Extra part added there at the end of the Gospel of Mark by some of the early church people. And of course, Jesus does promise his disciples in Acts chapter 1 that they will go throughout the entire world sharing the good news. And Jesus says to Thaddeus that this is all his if he'll just hold on to the very end. And I think Hebrews chapter 3, verse 14 should certainly be held here in mind. All we have to do is hold on to the very end, and Jesus has this kingdom, these blessings in front of us. Now, flashing forward, Thaddeus showing up to be with the other disciples. We see the maturation of James. He doesn't have to sit right next to Jesus. He's happy to sit next to Thomas. He seems so close to understanding what's going on with Jesus in these scenes after he's experienced his own sort of brush with death that the show has brought to him. I think that's interesting since we know that James was the first martyr. He's showing a little more spiritual maturity, and I like how the show is bringing that out. We have Mark, who is laying down his bed listening to Jesus and his disciples sing a hymn, which is referenced in Matthew chapter 26, verse 30, that they sang a hymn before they went out to the Mount of Olives. And the hymn that they sing is Psalm 118, a very important scripture for the early church, referenced in all the synoptic gospels, referenced in Acts, and referenced at 1 Peter. The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone, the cornerstone. Jesus is that stone. He's the one who the Jewish people, the religious leaders have rejected, but he's the one that God has chosen. We see Peter and James grab the swords. Simon the Zealot himself is a weapon, so he doesn't get a sword. And they briefly discuss what Jesus meant when he seemed to indicate Judas would betray him and Simon would deny him, but they're confused and think it might be a metaphor. Then we have the scene from the Garden of Gethsemane, and we go to these Mount of Olives scenes. Mark chapter 14, verses 32 through 34 is primarily in mind here, but Matthew 26 and Luke chapter 22, and also, of course, John chapter 19, John 17, 18, and 19, all included here, all passages that we should keep in mind. Pilate and Atticus have a confrontation. This is an important confrontation for us to understand a little bit more about Atticus' motivations, which I think has been a little confusing at times. We see that Atticus' primary focus is Rome. He loves Rome. He wants Rome to last forever. And I think what we see about this is that Atticus has some level of understanding that Jesus is someone special, and he sees that as a threat to what Rome is. Whatever he can't explain about Jesus, the power that he observes in Jesus that he can't produce is something beyond what Rome can experience. So even though he has admiration for Jesus, even though he has scorn for those who hate Jesus for no reason, he still wants Jesus eliminated because he believes that Jesus could be, if he wanted to be, an actual threat to the power of the Roman Empire. Pilate doesn't even understand this, but he's getting a little bit closer to that knowledge, and we see that his discomfort is primarily coming from the dreams that his wife is experiencing. He's too weak to really go after the understanding of those dreams and who Jesus might really be, but we see the conflict inside of him. And we have this scene of Caiaphas convening an illegal night meeting of the Sanhedrin. We see Nicodemus enter in a very powerful moment to confront Caiaphas about this illegal meeting. Yusuf, Joseph of Arimathea. We know that these are the two primarily mentioned in the Bible who believed in Jesus but were kind of afraid to make that known. Matthew 26, verse 57, John chapter 19, verses 38 through 39 should be kept in mind here. Judas arrives on the doorstep of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. He gets everyone together to go after Jesus. Judas is going to let them know who Jesus is with a kiss. Then we go back to the Garden of Gethsemane. Do we now see Jesus begin to have a panic attack? That seems to kind of be what's going on here. He's overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death as he has his inner circle of disciples around him. They're concerned about this, and Jesus wants them to be aware that this is more than a physical malady. This is something that God has called him to experience. And then we go into these scenes of Jesus praying in the Mount of Olives. The show has done a good job here trying to imagine what that prayer was like from the brief glimpses we get in the Gospels. Jesus is praying the Lord's Prayer and is repeating, "Take this cup from me. Make me stronger than I am. I don't know if I can go through with this." Luke chapter 22, verse 42, Matthew chapter 26, verse 39 should be kept in mind here. The show really emphasizes that Jesus doesn't have the strength that he wants to have, that he feels he needs to have to be able to do what the Father has asked him to do. And I love how they bring out that human aspect of what is going on here. I think it is faithful to the glimpses we see of Jesus in the garden, just struggling on a very human basis as God in human flesh to be able to go through with the immense amount of pain and suffering and separation, rejection, and loneliness ahead of him. All the pain that's about to be inflicted on his followers when he's taken from this earth. All of that is coming along him. And so then we have these moments where Jesus is encouraged. He's reminded of Genesis 22, of Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac and telling Isaac that a ram will be provided for Isaac, that a way will be provided for him. And so then out of that, we see that Jesus begins to ask, well, will that be provided for me? Perhaps not realizing that he is the ram who is provided for the sons of humanity, for humans who are the ones who over the years, sons and daughters have been sacrificed for the sins of their parents. And who's going to make all that right? Who's going to restore what life and sin have taken from us? And the answer is that it's Jesus, and it's his suffering on our behalf that is going to make things right with God, because he'll embrace everything that is broken about our world to make it right. Jesus sees his disciples sleeping. We can see this in Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 through 46, and Mark chapter 14, verses 32 through 42. And we see fog come around Jesus as he goes now to the vision of the valley of dry bones. I have to admit, this scene always gives me chills, Love seeing the show bring out this important passage in terms of resurrection theology in the Old Testament of Ezekiel, the prophet standing in a valley of dry bones, being asked by God, Son of Man, can these bones live? Saying, only you know. And then God, of course, breathes life into those bones. And Ezekiel is now seeing Jesus about to breathe life into those bones. And he comforts Jesus. I love how the show gives us these moments of people comforting Jesus, offering Jesus some encouragement. I don't know that it quite makes sense with everything that I imagined about the Ezekiel passage, but I'm willing to go along with it because of how beautiful it is, and that scene reminding us that God can breathe life into all dead things, and that Jesus is doing that. He's reversing the curse of death through what he's about to do on the cross. Now, Luke chapter 22, verse 43 tells us that Jesus was strengthened by an angel, or angel could be translated messenger, from heaven. And here in the show, they made the bold choice of having that angel, that messenger, be Joseph. Now, important to remember, angels, as we understand them, spiritual beings, are not human beings who have died. But there is no way to say for sure that a messenger from heaven can't be somebody who's died. That certainly does happen at times in Scripture. And I think it's so perfect here to have Joseph be the one who encourages Jesus. As a dad, as a son of a great dad, in this moment, there's no one that you'd rather have hug you and say, I'll be waiting for you. I know what's going on. I'm giving you my love, than the father who loves you. And having Joseph do that to him, what a perfect choice by this show, and very emotional for me to watch. And finally, we see Jesus head out with his disciples, his frail and weak disciples, as Judas shows up with the guards. These moments fraught with meaning, these pauses, these camera angles, giving us this description of Judas making this decision to kiss Jesus. Beautiful ending to the season as it fades to black and we hear that very small kiss from Judas on Jesus' cheek. And then we get to hear the hymn, Flee as a Bird to Your Mountain, a hymn based on Psalm 11:1. All about when you're about to face your oppressor, how do you handle it? How does God provide for us, as we know Jesus is about to experience in the next season? Perhaps it's certainly got to be, for me, one of the top 5 episodes that The Chosen has done. Beautifully, cinematically shot and written and acted. I thought the season as a whole was uneven, but wow, this final episode was certainly worth the watch and rewatch, and I can't wait to see how the show is able to handle season 6 and the story of Jesus' death and his suffering on the cross and all that that means for us.